This is my guide to MSI Afterburner, a free program you can use to custom tune your computer's video card. Although I used Afterburner to tune my AMD Radeon video card, this video will also be fairly useful to bros with NVIDIA video cards. This video is densely packed with information, so pause the video as needed and make use of the timestamps in the video description box. With that said, on to the slides and video demonstrations. Here is the main user interface of MSI Afterburner. If you have downloaded a previous version of Afterburner, what you see will likely look different. However, the underlying functionality will be the same. Now there are quite a number of things to look at here, all sorts of buttons and sliders, and it can be quite overwhelming. But over the course of this video, you will become familiar with practically everything that you're looking at right now. The first thing I want to show is the hardware monitor. To open that, click the Detach button. As you can see, Afterburner is collecting data about many of your computer's hardware components. I will later set up an on-screen display that shows selected pieces of data while playing computer games. I will also remove graphs that I'm not interested in reviewing. Specifically, I will remove information about each individual thread on my CPU. To set up an on-screen display, first click the gear for settings, then click the monitoring tab. Take a look at this list of items. Each item represents a graph that you can view by closing the settings and clicking on the Detach button to view the hardware monitor. The first thing to do is to launch a game, so I have essentially a canvas upon which to place my on-screen display. This game is Broforce. This game is totally sweet and everyone should play it for great justice. I will be demonstrating how I set up my own on-screen display with my own preferences. The list of items that is available will depend on your brand and model of video cards. So for example, if you have a NVIDIA video card, you will have different items that you can select and display. As I am doing this, I am clicking on an item and highlighting it in blue, and then clicking Show in On-Screen Display, and then applying. As I do this, you can see that items are being added to the Broforce window. With regard to my CPU, I do not like to monitor each individual thread and core. And I'm also disabling monitoring of such things in the background monitoring window by selecting the entire type and disabling the check mark. However, I am monitoring statistics for my overall CPU usage and temperature. And that is now showing up in the on-screen display, as you can see. By default, MSI Afterburner does not display your frame rate. With regard to current frame rate, I like to display it not only as text but also a graph. This allows me to monitor my frame rate in real time for spikes and dips, which is something that you really want to avoid during gameplay. Naturally, you will have some dips and spikes when you are loading levels, but during your gameplay, that's something you definitely want to avoid. If you have that, it's probably due to a driver issue or some sort of setting in your game that is not entirely compatible. Now I'm demonstrating how to rearrange groups. If you look at the on-screen display, you will notice that it consists of several rows. Each row corresponds to a group. So I'm going to move my RAM group to the top of my on-screen display by moving it to the top of the list. Furthermore, because I have 16 gigabytes of RAM, I will relabel it as RAM 16 gigabytes. Now, you certainly don't have to relabel your group names, but I chose to do so just so people know what sort of hardware I'm using. I'm repeating the process with CPU usage, or CPU. I'm relabeling this since I have a Ryzen 5 3600 CPU. Furthermore, I like to move my usage statistic furthermost to the left within the group name. To do that, just take the item and drag it up to the top of the group. As you can see now, for the most to the left, I have my usage percentage of my Ryzen 5 3600. This group, the group MEM, actually is better described as VRAM, which is special memory chips installed directly onto your video card for the sole purpose of graphics processing. My particular video card has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. And as with the CPU, I want to move the usage statistic furthermost to the left. So I'm currently using about 1 gigabyte of my video card's 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Just because Broforce is not very resource intensive does not make it any the less awesome. My video card is a Radeon RX 5700 and I'm relabeling it as such, and I've moved it to the top. And once again, I want to move my usage statistic furthermost to the left, so I drag it to the top and apply. Now I'm demonstrating how to essentially create new groups. To do so, select an item in an already existing group and override the group name. And as you see, I just created a new group called FPS Average. Then I'm repeating the process for FPS 1% low. To change colors, click on the display layout. And within this tab, there are many things you can play around with. I'm just going to demonstrate how I can change some colors. I'm going to change my FPS to yellow and apply, and you can see that take effect. And then I'm going to change my orange text to pink. Apply, and you see that take effect. Now I happen to like the default colors, so I click reset, and I'm fine with that. To set up a toggle for the on-screen display to turn it on and off, go to the on-screen display tab and set up a toggle hotkey. To set up a benchmark to reset your FPS average and FPS 1% low, set up hotkeys to do so. This is important because loading levels or pausing a game will cause those statistics to become inaccurate. To adjust font, size, and position of the text, you use the RivaTuner, which should be hidden in your system tray. To change the font, click on that raster 3D and take a pick. I'm going to choose Stencil. Changing the size of the font is particularly useful, especially if you have a high-resolution monitor, because otherwise your text can be too small. You can reposition by using either these corner buttons or just grabbing the text in that little window and moving it around as so. Click the reset button to reset all RivaTuner statistics to default. Here's how I go about overclocking my Radeon RX 5700. First, I save with this little disk icon. I save profile 1. The reason I do that will become evident later in the video. Next step, because overclocking can generate more heat, I click on Auto to disable automatic fan control, and I move the slider all the way to 75%, which is really quite loud, but at least it'll keep my video card cool. I click Apply because you have to apply to make practically everything take effect when you're using this Afterburner interface. Next, I run a stress test, MSI Kombustor that we've already installed. I'll run it in the smallest possible window. It's fine that I run in a very small window. This program will still maximally stress my video card. And the way you can see that it is indeed doing so is you'll see that the GPU usage is at 99%. Next, I will increase my power limit slider all the way to the maximum, which in my case is plus 10%, and apply. Next, I will begin the incremental procedure of increasing my core clock. The procedure of overclocking is, well, first, not 1776, 1760. I'm just a little too American. Anyhow, I just set it up by one increment. If you have a NVIDIA card, you will begin at 0 in that. So, for example, with a NVIDIA card, you'd simply set it at 10. But since I have an AMD card, I go up by 10, which takes me from 1750 to 1760. So as you can see, I'm just increasing the core clock by 10 megahertz increments. And I'm taking a peek at MSI Kombustor for about 30 seconds between each increase. Each time, remember, each time I input a new value, I have to click on that apply button or it'll not take effect. Now I've already overclocked my video card. I know that I can set the core clock at 1850 megahertz and be stable. So now that I have done the core clock overclocking, I move on to the next step, which is the memory clock. I add 10 megahertz. Now with NVIDIA, you will start with 0, but memory on NVIDIA is different. Instead of using 10 megahertz jumps on a NVIDIA card, you should go up by, let's say, 50 megahertz, and then come down by 100 when you crash or see flickering. And I already know from prior experience that my card can manage 1820. I crashed at 1840, and I think a good rule of thumb is to come down by 20 on an AMD card. Come down by 100 on a NVIDIA card. Okay, so now I have what I think is a stable overclock. I would get a little bit more evidence it is indeed stable by running Kombustor for another 10 minutes. And in the meantime, because my fan is very loud, I can adjust the fan speed down, but just make sure that the temperatures don't get out of control. Remember, you want to keep your GPU under 80 and your memory under 90. Okay, it looks like I have a stable overclock, so let's save this as profile 2. Click the disk for save and click 2. And now review. Profile 1 is stock defaults. Profile 2 is my overclock profile with the fan at 60%. So here's how I undervolt my Radeon video card. Unfortunately, the procedure for undervolting is much different for NVIDIA, but with YouTube you can find a video for that if you need it. Step 1, enable voltage monitoring. So click Settings, tick Unlock Voltage Monitoring, and Apply. And this mandates a restart. And as you can see under Volt, I now have a reading. Step 2, run Kombustor, once again in windowed mode. Minimum resolution is fine. Purpose is just to stress my video card to test for stability. Just as we had to test for stability with overclocking, we have to do it with undervolting. And overall, the procedure for undervolting feels a lot like overclocking. Now I'm going to load my stock profile, which is not overclocked. Click Apply to finish loading it. Then I open the curve editor, represented by those 3 ascending bars. Now I'm going to reduce the peak voltage by 5 millivolts. So for that, you go to the bottom graph, and you find that tiny little box, and use the arrow key to bring it down 5 millivolts, and click Apply. And then you watch Kombustor for about 30 seconds for glitches or a crash. And if you don't crash or glitch, then you can go down another 5 millivolts. Now grabbing those little white boxes is a little tricky. They're small, and sometimes when you click it, it'll jump up or down. So use a notebook and a piece of paper just to keep track of where you are with regards to how far you're undervolted so far. Now I know from prior experience that when I was doing this, I crashed my computer at negative 95 millivolts. I think a good rule of thumb is to go up by 15 millivolts from the point of crash, so I set it at negative 80, which corresponds to a large undervolt going all the way down to 937 millivolts from a stock starting point of 1012. Okay, so now that I've completed undervolting, I'm not going to reset, that's the wrong button. I'm going to click the Save button, and I'm going to save and overwrite profile 1. Okay, now I'm going to undervolt my overclock profile that I previously set up. So I'm going to load profile 2, and I'm going to click Apply to finish loading it. You can see that I've got those overclock clocks going on. I already have the curve editor already open, so once again, I'm going to drop this peak voltage by 5 millivolts. As you can see there, just clicking on that box made it jump up, so you have to be mindful of that. The jumping box. Okay, I was stable at negative 5. Bring it down another 5, down to negative 10. Down another 5. Okay, and I previously crashed my overclocked profile when I went down by only 25 millivolts. So 15 millivolts above that is negative 10. I figure I'll be stable at negative 10, which is really not very much of an undervolt for my overclock profile, but I'll take what I can get. So I'd, once again, just like overclocking, I would run Kombustor for 10 minutes just to make sure it doesn't crash. And finally, I would save and overwrite my overclock profile, profile 2. And that's undervolting. Okay, so setting a static fan speed at 60% is really subpar. So here I am running my overclock profile with the stock fan curve. Let's check out my temperatures. My GPU temperature is acceptable at 72. But my memory temperature, my VRAM temperature, that's a little hotter than I want it to be. And finally, I should point out that what you see right there in the lower left of Kombustor, that's my Radeon hotspot, and that's actually fine up to 95. So to set a fan curve, I click Settings, Fan, Enable my own custom curve, and the way you fix this up is you click on the little boxes and you can drag them around to create your own fan curve. I'm setting up a fan curve so my fan runs slower and quieter when my GPU is at lower temperatures, and then the fan will increase in speed as the temperature rises. And finally, I will max out my fan speed if my GPU's temperature hits 85, the point at which I really need to prioritize not damaging my hardware. Okay, apply. And then what you will see is that this little user-defined icon has become highlighted. And that indicates that my custom fan curve is in effect. Now I'm going to save and overwrite my overclock profile, profile 2. And then when I highlight it, you will see that the last thing is auto, which indicates I'm no longer at 60%. Now I'm at automatic fan curve. Once you're certain that your profiles are stable, it's a good idea to set Afterburner to automatically load them when Windows starts. Click Settings and check Start with Windows and apply. Next, to make sure the profile you're using last starts, click Apply at Windows Startup button and you'll see the icon becomes blue or changes. To lock your profile so you don't mess them up, just click the Lock Profiles button and you'll see that the icon changes. Now that we've enabled voltage monitoring, if you want to see it in the on-screen display, go to your Monitoring tab, and you will see that now GPU voltage is available. Because it's a member of group GPU, I want to place it right after power in my GPU group. But because I previously renamed my GPU group, I have to rename this likewise, Radeon RX 5700. Otherwise, I would just end up with a stray GPU group. And there it is. On-screen display, I see my current voltage, currently at 1.006 volts. Okay, my profiles are complete. Once again, profile 1, that is stock clocks, but significantly undervolted to run nice and cool. And profile 2, that is my maximum performance profile, overclocked as far as I could push. Furthermore, I have my custom fan curve in effect because the user profile and automatic fan curve buttons are highlighted. And finally, this will all load automatically.